Hi guys! Today in my video I'm going to be talking quickly about hormones that control our digestive system, which are super important. I'm also going to review all of the enzymes and talk about what each of them does and where it comes from, just to make sure we have all that information in our table in our notes. So today in our hormone lesson, we are starting on page 19 in your notes. So we're going to go through each hormone. So we have three of them that we have to remember for Bio 20. So gastrin is the first one, which comes from our stomach, and it is going to start releasing from our stomach when food enters our stomach. And what it does is it tells the stomach to basically allow more hydrochloric acid to be produced. The reason we have gastrin is because if hydrochloric acid was always really high, it could potentially start to break down the stomach lining and cause some ulcers to happen. So we want to just increase that hydrochloric acid so that it's really, really high only when food is there. Secretin comes from the duodenum, which is the very first section of our small intestine, and it is going to be stimulated when the chyme, which is basically the digested food and enzymes and whatnot, enters into our duodenum, and it's going to tell the stomach to stop kind of moving so much so that the stomach isn't pushing more chyme into the duodenum until that duodenum has time to actually break down the chyme and start to actually do what it needs to do. CCK also comes from the duodenum, and it also has the same stimulus as secretin, so it's going to be released when the chyme enters the duodenum. It's also going to tell the stomach to stop moving. So it has basically the exact same function and exact same information as secretin does. So the whole idea behind all of these hormones is they're going to just make sure that the stomach slowly releases stuff into the duodenum. So not all of it just rushes out of the stomach into the duodenum, because then the duodenum won't have time to actually break everything down, and it's going to end up giving us a pretty sore stomach, and end up probably releasing a lot of nutrients in our feces when it should be having time to absorb into our bloodstream. It also is going to make sure that things that are harder to digest can hang out in our stomach for a little bit longer. So, for example, if we're having a really fatty meal, fat is a little bit more difficult for our body to break down. So the fatty meals can stay in our stomach for a little bit longer so that they have a little bit more time to kind of break down. And we also, CCK not only does the thing that it talks about on the other slide where it stops the stomach from secreting, it also makes sure that all the pancreatic enzymes are released. So we know that the pancreas releases a whole bunch of enzymes, obviously super important. So it's going to make sure that those enzymes are released and make sure that we also have lots of bicarbonate ion to neutralize our stomach acid so that it's not burning our duodenum. Because the duodenum should be about a pH of 8, and it's the stuff is coming from the stomach, which is a pH of about 2. So we have to neutralize that quite a bit, change the pH of it quite a bit in order for it to be comfortable in our stomach slash in our duodenum. So that is the information that we need to know about our hormones that work in our digestive system. So we're going to move to the next page, page 20, and we're going to write some information about all of the different enzymes that we have in our body. So just a review, we know all of this stuff already, but just a review to make sure that we remember it. So I'm going to go through all of the different enzymes, and I'm going to remind you where they came from and remind you what they do. So we have salivary amylase. Salivary amylase comes from the salivary glands, and it's going to take starch and break it down into maltose. So it's going to take a polysaccharide and break it down into a disaccharide. Pancreatic amylase does the same thing, but it comes from the pancreas. So because the salivary glands are releasing stuff into our mouth, we're only really holding food in our mouth for about 30 seconds to a minute max. It doesn't really have a chance to break down all of the starches into maltose. So the pancreatic amylase is allowing us to do this a second time to make sure that all of the starch gets broken down into maltose. We have 3 different carbohydrates that break down all of the disaccharides into monosaccharides. So sucrase, is going to break down sucrose into glucose and fructose. Maltose is going to break down, maltase is going to break down maltose into glucose and glucose. And lactase is going to break down lactose into glucose and galactose. So those are our 3 carbohydrates. All 3 of them come from the same spot, which is the wall of the intestine, and release into the duodenum. We also have our hormone that starts breaking down protein, which is found in the stomach. So the stomach wall releases it into the stomach, and it's going to start unfolding the proteins so that we can call them polypeptides. So basically, a quaternary protein breaks down into a primary protein, and then we can start breaking that primary protein, which is called a polypeptide, into smaller pieces with things like trypsin coming from the pancreas, and breaks that polypeptide into smaller pieces of polypeptides. So polypeptides could be hundreds of amino acids long, so we're eventually wanting to break it into individual amino acids, but we need a couple of different enzymes to help with that process. So moving down on our table, I just didn't have enough room to put it on one slide. So we also have peptidase. Peptidase comes from the pancreas and the intestinal wall, so both places release those things. And those are going to be the enzymes that break down our proteins into amino acids. So those smaller polypeptide chains that we have left over eventually get broken individually into amino acids, and they come from 2 different places. Lipase, you might have also seen it been called pancreatic lipase because it's coming from the pancreas, and it is the only enzyme that we use to break down fat. So it takes a triglyceride and breaks it into the fatty acids and glycerol that make it up. Now, we don't really talk a ton about nucleic acids or the enzymes that break them down, but just in case, so we have the information filled in, nucleases come from the pancreas, and they break nucleic acids into nucleotides. And then nucleosidases come from the intestinal wall and break the nucleotides into the 3 components that make them up, which are phosphate, sugar, and nitrogen bases. So that is the entire table for the enzymes that you guys have in your notes. So this is just a little review to make sure that we can remember the stuff that we learned from before. And hopefully it helps you kind of compile all the information into one place. Have a good day. Talk to you guys later.